and I lead UL Standards and Engagement. We're a safety standards development and advocacy organization that traces our roots back over 130 years to when electricity was first coming to buildings and they were catching fire. So we have this long tradition now of working in electrical safety. And particularly what we hear to talk about at CES is innovation, right? This is really the home of innovation. We've seen so many great products, technologies come out of CES, as this year CTA celebrates 100 years. But always part of that story of innovation is also hazards and risks, because there are risks in many new technologies, and we want to be able to facilitate those new technologies without letting risk hold them back. So one thing is absolutely clear: we cannot let risk hold back innovation. And one of the specific areas that we're looking at there is batteries. So we've all seen this amazing growth and expansion of the use of lithium-ion batteries. First it was mobile devices. In fact, probably some of you are carrying around multiple mobile devices powered by lithium-ion batteries. Now more recently, it's the whole clean energy transition. So many elements of that path of electrification and clean energy rely on batteries and energy storage, all the way from big commercial-grade battery energy storage systems, all the way down to electric vehicles, and then smaller devices like e-scooters and e-bikes. But as much as batteries are bringing these amazing technologies to market, there are always risks associated with that. And that's really where we come in. And just to give you some idea, I can just show you here what can happen. Next, there we go. Whoop. This is CES, never do a live demo, right? Let's try and run this one. So just if you watch this is an e-scooter in someone's home. And what you're about to see is this process of thermal runaway. And just in a very short period of time, how this room is filled with fire, with smoke, also with lots of pixelation by the looks of it. But in 20 seconds, this room is really consumed by fire. And that just shows some of the risks that can come from damaged goods, counterfeit goods, overcharged products, and others. But those kind of risks lead to these really dangerous fires that burn with tremendous intensity and power. And we've looked at a lot of these incidents, but we also look at consumers' awareness. And in fact, only about half of American consumers understand the risk that's posed from these batteries and the need to follow certain procedures and take care of them, look out for damage and things like that. One of the most concerning areas where you think about lithium-ion battery safety is in airplanes. So confined space, up at high altitude, and all the people who are carrying these mobile devices. And we also have a program called TRIP, which works with airlines and cargo carriers to look at incidents, and it's running 1 or 2 incidents a week now of thermal runaway inside aircraft. So grounds for concern, certainly, but then the question is, what can we do about this? What are some of the solutions to address the risks of lithium-ion batteries? And that's really where I introduce our organization. As I mentioned, our first standard was 120 years ago. We've been developing these consensus-based safety standards ever since. And they're really ensuring the safety of new technologies and innovation in the marketplace. So we convene expert technical committees of volunteers who come from companies, academia, government, other organizations, all about setting these kind of standards to ensure safety. And in our 120 years of standards development, we now have close to 1,800 standards and other documents, including a whole series that cover the safety of lithium-ion batteries, from the pure cells themselves all the way up to electric vehicles and to those larger energy storage systems. So my hope coming out of CES is, as we talk about the importance of safety and innovation, we'll seek manufacturers who look for more opportunities to work on safety standards and incorporate them into their product development. We'll also look for more technical committee members, so those who will volunteer their time and expertise to ensure that we have the very best safety standards that we can. And so to go into some more details on that, we've set up a great panel with experts from the International Association of Firefighters, as well as UL Standards and Engagement. So let me turn it over to Sayon Deb, who is Director of Insights and Policy Analysis for ULSE, to tell you about the panelists and to introduce the discussion. Thank you.
We're clapping for you.
Excellent. Well, great to have you both. Great to be at CES and back at Research Summit. Pleasure to be joined by Sean DeCrane, who's a former Cleveland Battalion Chief and renowned fire expert, as well as Denice Durrant, my colleague and esteemed data scientist at ULSE. So yeah, really great to be here and talking about this really important topic. As Dr. Steele just introduced, today lithium batteries power all kinds of rechargeable products. In fact, 3 of us are strapped to lithium batteries powering our little modules here that are enabling us to speak. But they also power a lot of the popular tech products we use, right? So smartphones, e-bikes, and all the way up to electric vehicles. So really a nice spectrum of sizes that are being used, right? So, and many of the great innovations we'll see on the CES show floor often highlight portability or, long battery life, lightweight, and a lot of that's enabled partly because of lithium batteries. But because these batteries are so widespread, we know there's risk that sort of carries with it. So, before we dive into the discussion on batteries and what we can do to mitigate some of these risks and what they actually mean, I'd like my panelists to introduce themselves a little bit, and then we'll get started. So, Sean, if you want to, actually, Denice, you want to get started first, and then we'll go to Sean. Yeah.
Thank you. Absolutely. So right now, I work at UL Standards and Engagement, and the team that I lead is Data Science and Engineering. And our goal is to make sure that our standards have the right inputs, the right technical inputs, to advance the rigor of those documents to make sure that they're addressing the right risks. So we assess those items so that we can ensure that our stakeholders have the right information. We can prioritize where the standard can truly be an influence when it comes to safety. And I will say, as far as my background, I am an engineer. I have a little bit of data science experience, but as an engineer, one of the things that I've always seen is the need to identify ways for things to be constructed better or to find different alternatives. And that, to me, is really what innovation is all about. So when we think about battery technology and this battery revolution that we're in, and we've been in it for a while, it's important for us as standards developers to understand the risks, but also not stifle the innovation and present solutions that can ultimately drive safety.
My turn, huh?
Yes.
Oh, I get to follow that. Sean DeCrane, currently I'm the Director of Health and Safety Operational Services for the International Association of Firefighters. The IAFF is a trade organization. We represent approximately 343,000 career firefighters and paramedics across the US and Canada. As Sayon mentioned, my previous life, I was the battalion chief in the city of Cleveland, Ohio. And then after 26 years in Cleveland, when I retired, I went to work at UL Solutions for 6 years before the opportunity came to go back to the fire service and back to the IFF. And I'm based in Washington, although I still live in Cleveland. And I've been involved with UL for many years, really. And it goes back to my participation in the codes and standards on behalf of the fire service almost 20 years ago. And really the importance of research into developing our codes and standards to protect our firefighters. I was fortunate enough to be appointed to the UL Fire Safety Research Institute as a member of their advisory board at the inception. So I've been participating with FSRI in researching a lot of these areas as it relates to firefighting tactics and the science of firefighting. And really this delved into the concerns with lithium-ion batteries. We'll talk a little bit about it, but really in April of 2019 in Arizona, there was a failure in an energy storage system. And that failure led to severe injuries to 4 firefighters, 2 of them life-threatening. And it really kind of woke up the fire service on some of the safety issues concerning lithium-ion batteries. That got us into the research through FSRI and ULSE Solutions. And the goal is not to say, hey, this can't come to the marketplace. Really, from our perspective in the fire service, it's how do we deal with it when it comes to the marketplace? Because everything will fail. We need to understand what that looks like when it fails, so then we can start to develop our response strategies and our tactics to meet those challenges. And I think we'll talk a little bit more about that today.
Yeah, absolutely, right. I think so. That really brings it to the point. Like I think Dr. Steele mentioned it, and I kind of mentioned it a little bit ago too. The broad market use really spreads that footprint of risks and hazard, right? So you've got small products that have small batteries yet capable of creating smoke, and then you've all the way to the larger end of the spectrum with vehicles using kind of these large packs of batteries essentially that can catch on fire as well. So, and just over the past couple of weeks, I think even this morning there was a couple news stories on EV-related fires. We've seen fires on cargo container ships bringing lithium batteries over. And I think what's kind of unfortunate actually is like we want people to dispose of these batteries properly, speaking of consumers or whoever, but when they end up at recycling centers, we see the incidences of fires there as well. I think the video really captured well in terms of how the fire reacts and acts differently, right? So Sean, let me start with you. Given 25 years of firefighting experience, you've seen a few fires in your time, right? Why are these fires different and how are they different?
These fires are extremely different from a typical fire that the fire service is used to responding to. And one of the biggest contributing factors of that is speed. Over the years, when we looked at through UL's research, we understand that natural fiber furniture took about 28 to 29 minutes to reach flashover, where all the contents, all the combustible contents in a room will reach its ignition temperature, and then you have a room full of fire. We've seen that a transition to modern furniture or synthetic, that time has been cut down to 5 or 6 minutes. The problem that we're seeing with the batteries is that consumer product can be sitting there in the corner looking just fine and normal, and then with the matter of 20 seconds, you could have a room that's flashed over and fully consumed with fire. That creates a significant fire hazard, obviously, to the responding firefighters, but it's a real significant challenge to the occupants. And in many cases, their means of egress have been cut off. And we've seen that in New York. When you start to go vertical, the higher up in the building, that individual only has one means of egress out of that apartment. And so that's where we're seeing it's a significant challenge. And also, I think David mentioned in his opening, the compartmentation and the buildup of these flammable explosive gases inside that compartment now creates that pressure risk that we're facing.
I think, I think there's saw a stat somewhere where, 40, 50 years ago, the fire took about 30 minutes, to average home to kind of spread out, right? And what's the stat now with given more of an open layout for most homes, like 3 minutes or something like that, right?
We can have conditions become untenable in 3 to 3.5 minutes.
Right. Yeah. And so, I think that it's a good kind of pivot to, so we know that the fires are different, right? And, just the way Sean described. So Denice, in your work, what exactly causes a lithium fire? So, we've got devices right here. We're all doing fine. There's no smoke visible. So where do we get to that point where we trip, we go into thermal runaway?
Yeah, that's a great question because for most people, we don't understand the risk behind the curtain with a lot of these products. So one of the things that I always like to tell people is that lithium-ion batteries, they utilize flammable materials and chemical elements. And what happens with that battery when it overheats is it can go into that condition called thermal runaway. So if you've seen any of these incidents on the news most recently, you've heard the term thermal runaway. David mentioned it earlier. And essentially what that is this chain reaction. And in that chain reaction, there's a buildup, like Sean mentioned, of toxic gases. And with that chain reaction, it's simply a state or a condition in which that lithium-ion battery cell goes into a state of uncontrollable self-heating. And what I like to tell people, because I know that's a very high-level technical definition, but what I like to tell people is that there's a couple of things you need to be concerned about when it comes to thermal runaway. You need to be concerned about heat, and that's heat that is fast. You need to be concerned about fire. You also need to be concerned about the release of toxic gases that can result in an explosion. And to think about thermal runaway from the standpoint of the different types of products that we engage with on a daily basis is frightening. And so for standards developers, it's important for us to understand those risks so that we can build that into our standards and they can truly be a risk mitigation strategy.
Right.
The last thing I'll say is, in terms of what causes thermal runaway, it could be a couple of different things. It can be physical abuse to the battery. It can be how the battery is being handled. It could be wear and tear. Like Sean mentioned, you may see it there and it's fine, but in a matter of seconds, because of something that may happen inside of that battery, like a short circuit, it can go into thermal runaway, and within seconds after that, you may see a fire or an explosion. So with those things, you'll see that there's several of our popular brands out there that are informing our stakeholders and users about, if you're utilizing a product or engaging with a product that incorporates a lithium-ion battery, it's important that, for example, you use the right charging components. A lot of us have rechargeable products that we utilize every day. Some of us have it, covered on our bodies right now. But when we think about those products, it's important to understand that we have to use the right components. And for us as a standards developer, the other thing that's important is that we can't develop standards in a vacuum. It's not always about the battery. It's about how the battery is integrated into other technologies. And it's also about, taking the battery down to the cell level so that we understand the different hazards and risks. And then, like you mentioned, Sayon, with batteries that are coming over on cargo ships, understanding how those batteries are being transported and ultimately how they're being recycled as well. So we have to consider all of those things because they can all contribute to a battery fire.
Can I just mention something to build on what Denice mentioned? One of my last fires in Cleveland that I had as an incident commander involved a laptop battery that was utilizing a knockoff charger.
Right.
It was a 16-year-old kid, and this isn't just, the point I want to make is, it's not just a loss of a laptop, but it has a socioeconomic impact as well. And this was a very low-income neighborhood. This house was the center of that street. It was the father was an 82-year-old gentleman who you could see the neighbors really, really looked up to. And the son had gone down and grabbed a charger from a dollar store, came home and was charging the laptop on the bedding, and it overheated and caused significant damage to the house. And when I was talking to the father, I said, well, the insurance will cover it. He goes, insurance? He goes, I can't get insurance in this neighborhood. I can't afford that. I'm going to have to move. And that neighborhood lost that rock in that neighborhood. And I've thought about that ever since. And it all came down to saving a couple of dollars on the charger.
Yeah.
They didn't know, but that's the impact. And to build on what Denice said, it's not necessarily always about that one product, but it's that series, it's the environment.
Right.
And counterfeit products are such a large focus for both of our organizations, right? I think, and Dr. Steele penned a great op-ed several months ago about how counterfeit products do more than economic harm, and that's exactly where you're getting to, right? Even thinking of the economic harm, some 30% odd of global battery market is counterfeit products, and I think in 2020, roughly $20 billion in losses worldwide. So there's both an economic loss as well as the kind of the communal and kind of the human impact on it too. I think that's it acts in two different directions, which makes it a larger problem. And often, Denice, these kind of low quality, even counterfeit batteries, they lack some of the controls that first-party batteries or original manufacturer batteries put in, right? So in your kind of tracking work of tracking hazardous incidents, what types of devices are more likely to experience thermal runaway? Is it, are counterfeits often the source of failure, when you're looking at the data?
Counterfeits are definitely at the top of the list. And like you said, it's because when we think about the market, we know that there's a lack of regulation in some cases. And so for some products where there's not a standard or where there's not the appropriate knowledge and awareness about the different types or the preferable types of replacement parts or accessories or components that need to basically be paired with those products, right, that becomes a significant larger risk. But I would say where we see a lot of lithium-ion battery fires are with the things that we all touch and see every day. Right. So, of course, in the news, we see e-bikes, personal mobility products, Sean's mentioned some of the things that he's seen as a firefighter, energy storage systems.
Right.
Some of those things that are really improving, like Dr. Bush mentioned last night during the keynote, some of the things that are really improving the way that we live, the way that we work, and the way that we move are introducing these hazards and risks that we need to be aware of and be prepared to mitigate.
And I know your team, beyond just the which products are failing, you also look at, how products fail, right? So there's a kind of a dual kind of factors behind it, right? So it's the counterfeit products, but is it, let's say it's a first party, a kind of a brand name product. What role does user error versus, the actual device itself or charger or whatever malfunctioning? What kind of story is the data kind of telling us there?
Yeah, that's a great question because our data science and engineering team at UL Standards and Engagement, we are looking at incident data from consumer product reports. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission, they have a database that's called the National Electronic Injury Surveillance System. Say that a couple times. But with that database, we're able to pull reports on different consumer products. And those reports include what's called a narrative. And with that narrative, we're able to pull key information about the failure mode, the fault condition, what ultimately caused, that incident to happen. And then also, what was the harmful occurrence coming out of it? Did someone get hurt? Was it a burn? Was it a laceration? Was it a fall? Or was it something more serious like a fatality? Or was it property damage or loss to the environment? So we're able to utilize, utilizing data science applications and data science approaches, ways to look at narrative descriptions of medical records to figure out, what's causing these things. And what I'll say about user error versus device malfunctions is that with user error, this is all about whether or not the user, the consumer, is using the product adequately, or do they have the awareness to utilize that product adequately. And when it comes to device malfunctions, these are the things that we can't prevent as a user because there's wear and tear over time, there's that battery or that product going into a state where it's physically abused. Some of these things we can work into our standard, but not always can we work into the standard, ways that we can mitigate against user error. Although we can pull some of that information from the data. And I would say in 2023, 2024, one of the things that we want to launch is an initiative called the Hazard Scanner. The Hazard Scanner for us will tell us more about standards that are hazards that we haven't experienced before. Right now we know all about fire hazards, we know all about mechanical hazards, we know all about human health and the environment, but there are some hazards that we just don't have a lot of information on. So we're utilizing the Hazard Scanner. We call it like this next generation approach to hazard information. That's really helping us be proactive about how we approach safety.
Yeah, it's hard to put guardrails against every human behavior, right? So, and I'll cop up to, right? Last night I wanted to make sure the iPad was fully charged, so I did leave it unplugged, unplugged at the end of the night, but I still left it plugged for a little bit, and I was out of the room for a little bit. So those kind of things we all do, right? Leaving the phone plugged in, leaving your e-bike plugged in, maybe even your EV plugged in, right? So Sean, let me flip that to you. At the front lines, the firefighters, like what kind of insights are they surfacing to you that that IFF works with?
No, we're seeing increasing instances. One of the, Denice mentioned data, and that's one of our challenges right now in the fire service. We utilize what's called the National Fire Incident Reporting System, and we rely on those company officers that are responding to these incidents to go online within their station and file their report and really look at the cause of the fire and a lot of information that goes to that. We're very, very limited in there. There's no drop-down box that talks about batteries, specifically lithium-ion batteries. So a lot of the information that we're collecting is anecdotal. We are working, actually, ULFSRI and Craig Weinshank, a shout out to Craig, is developing the next generation of that fire information under the U.S. Fire Administration, but we haven't gotten there yet. Our members are seeing, you mentioned that human interface, and we have a saying in the fire service that there are 3 leading causes of fire in the United States: men, women, and children. So you can design a great product, but when the human gets their hands on it, anything goes. So we're seeing failures. We've seen the ESS failure in a large incident. We've been working very hard in our codes and standards to try to isolate those, look for the installation, what are some of the requirements that go into those installations that start to recognize when a failure happens and isolate it. We're seeing failures with electric vehicles. Some of the challenges we've seen there are the flooding from Hurricane Ian caused a number of them. Salt water and lithium-ion batteries don't play well together. And we're seeing the consumer product failures. So then what we're also trying to understand is what are our response strategies? What are our tactics? And currently FDNY is utilizing an approach that's worked for them. But we're trying to work with the standards community to develop a guideline that says, okay, we want these products that we're going to be interacting with and removing a battery from the 20th floor. We want to make sure that when our members are engaged or interacting with this device, that it's actually going to protect them should there be a failure. So we are still learning as we're going along, and that's where the research will come and help supplement that knowledge. But really, if I put it into like a ranking order, I would say that consumer product is the #1 incident that our members are responding to and engaged with, and that's happening almost every day.
Right. And I think Dr. Steele mentioned in his remarks, and we've kind of talked about it as well. Awareness continues to be this plaguing problem, right? It's tends to be the kind of the source of origin. We have the device portfolio that we talked about, how device malfunction, use error, but what's the firefighter sort of awareness like? Is there still kind of still room to go, right? There's still enough education gap, right? Even at the kind of the front lines.
Oh, there's a ton of room to grow. We actually, we get a lot of questions. There are a lot of questions on inhalation hazards. I think NIOSH is looking to do a research project on that, looking at exposure to HF or heavy metals. Response and suppression strategies. I would say the fire service overall, the knowledge is very small. We at the IFF, we just worked with UL Solutions and ULFSRI to do a 2-year, it's a 3-year project. The 3rd year will be focused on education and getting the information out. But we just completed a research project looking at ESS installation in a residential garage. That's where we're seeing the majority of these installations are in a garage. And what are some of the contributing factors for firefighters? Can they recognize that a battery is involved? And what are the hazards and the explosion hazards? We're going to be spending the next 6 months getting that information out. And it's more of an awareness awareness initiative. Now what we have to do is follow up that research and really give them some guidelines on what are some of the proper tactics to approach. So I would say we're in the infancy of this, in raising the awareness, but certainly we're in the infancy of developing the operational guidelines to responding to these incidents.
And that sort of resonates with what we see in the consumer side of things, right? So consumers continue to be sort of fuzzy in terms of what they are and what kind of products they go into. Even thinking of like market-leading products like smartphones, tablets, like you at best get 40 to 45% of U.S. adults to confidently say that that's lithium batteries are what's powering my device. Right? And so you think about larger vehicles like EVs or even hybrid cars. The awareness is a little bit better. I think those consumers tend to do some research on the vehicle before they buy. So roughly around that 50% number, still not great, right? So every other EV and hybrid owner still isn't quite sure what's powering or what the battery type is in their vehicle. I think we've covered the gloom and doom scenario, right? We've gone over the risk, but we're at CES with solutions and opportunities. I think that's the key, really, the objective of the panel, right? So, starting with, either of you can really take this. What do you wish consumers knew about preventing these fires? Like, what would be kind of best practices, tips that we could offer to consumers or even the audience here to, either pass along or put in practice in their own life?
Oh, it's me. I get to start?
Sure.
No, that's okay. From the fire service perspective, we are looking to develop some public education. Actually, FSRI just put out the charge program, really to raise awareness of how you charge your device, when you charge your device, utilizing the right charger on the device. Also recognize if a failure starts to occur, get out of the house, get out of the apartment, call 911. Try not to damage the device. I think it's, from a fire service perspective, when this started to really become an issue that we were aware of, there were some that said, hey, we should ban these batteries. And I said, well, we're kind of too far down the road to do that. We'd be like that security guard in Austin Powers trying to stop the steamroller going, stop, and I mean, it's still going to run you over, but, because the forces that are driving this. What we have to do is be involved in the research and the development of the education for the fire service and for the public. You don't have to fear it, you can respect it and learn how to utilize it appropriately.
Right.
And I think that's really what, from a fire service perspective, we're going to be focused on, trying to get out that public education material that FSRI has developed, and also educating our own members to raise awareness, but also raise awareness on what their operational tactical considerations are.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting that some of the same approaches that you would use in the fire service are what we would use as standards developers, because the first piece is understanding what we're dealing with. And so for us at UL Standards and Engagement, not just for the data science and engineering team, but even for our technical committee members, our stakeholders who are helping us build and maintain these standards, it's important to understand the hazards. And we've said that word a couple of times on this panel. And I want to make sure that the people in this room and those that may be watching understand that when we say hazard, we're talking about a potential source of harm. Right. And that source of harm can lead to things like injuries and fatalities, property damage, and damage to the environment. And it's critical to understand what we're dealing with so that standards, for example, can play a space in creating a safe environment for all of us. And when I say environment, I'm talking about the room around us. There's so many products that incorporate lithium-ion batteries. We know how lithium-ion batteries can overheat and cause a fire. We know how they can cause explosions. How do we build that into a standard to create a solution that ultimately keeps us all safe? Because we want to make sure that we're mitigating those risks through the standard. We don't create standards so that they can be phone books. For those of you familiar with phone books, we want them to be active documents. And we know that the power of a standard is in its use. And we also know that standards are out there to provide consumers and users and product developers with that assurance that we're taking innovation in another step, because we're introducing things into our market, things into our society that ultimately improve the way that we live, but we're doing it in a safe way.
And for consumers, consumer choice, like retail choice, makes a difference, right? So when you see that $5 battery replacement for your e-bike on Temu.com or wherever, right? Maybe not the right choice for something that you don't want to essentially cause you any kind of harm, right? So I think there is that role that consumers can make in terms of like what they bring into their house, what they bring into their own personal tech ecosystem as well. So kind of pivoting away from consumers, given that the audience largely tends to be more kind of business, the community at CES. How should business leaders approach this with their downstream consumers? So customers, I mean. So not just the customers that buy their products, but also several players in the value chain along the way, right? So retailers, distributors, or whatnot. Denice, I'll start with you. We know, how trust and brand value is so interlinked, right? We tend to view that brand value is sort of protected. Safety can be an enhancer of that. So what would your sort of key takeaways be for business leaders?
What I will say to that is standards, should not be baked into innovation once the product is developed, once the product is already out there on the market. There's a great opportunity to integrate standards into the full life cycle of some of these technologies. So think about standards, think about the opportunity to test the safety of a product, to examine the safety of a product during the design process, during the idea itself. And what retailers can do is ensure that, when they're selling a product, if there's an opportunity to sell a product that's certified to a standard, it doesn't always have to be a UL standard, but when it's certified to a standard or tested to a standard, that gives both the seller as well as the purchaser, assurance that they're buying something that's going to ultimately keep them safe. I think, I can't remember who brought up the hoverboards, but that was an interesting product that was introduced to the market. Mm-hmm. I remember it because I wanted one. But what I did not want was a product that did not have any type of information out there about, what are the components that are used? How safe is it? Is it certified? No, not really, not even by some, offshore third-party testing lab. So for many of us, when these new products are introduced, there's an opportunity from the onset of the innovation process to when it's out there on the market to really look at opportunities to incorporate safety. And that's, as standards developers, what we're really all about.
Yeah, I think we have a mindset right now in our society that is anti-regulation, that thinks regulation is a hindrance to business development and ingenuity, and I could not disagree more. I think standardization and test standards are a pathway to the business. And from the fire service, we deal with testing standards, we deal with listing standards all the time. When we do our inspections, we're looking for tested and listed systems. That's what provides the protection in a building, or the assurance that those sprinkler systems are going to work, or that passive protection in that wall is going to contain the fire. All of our equipment is listed. And so if someone's coming to the market and there's no testing standard, no assurance that the public is going to get a product that's safe that they can take home, when the failures start to occur, the public starts to maybe not have the confidence in that product. And I go to the hoverboard issue that we were discussing backstage. When the hoverboards were coming to the market, we saw a number of incidents involving hoverboards. And in fact, we saw an incident in February, I believe, of 2016, where a hoverboard failed in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and it resulted in a young child losing her life. It also resulted in a firefighter dying during the response to that incident in a motor vehicle accident. We saw areas in the international market that started to ban hoverboards. They didn't want them in their market because they couldn't ensure the safety. So UL put together an outline of investigation, actually developed a test standard so manufacturers could come to the market and say, no, we've tested the UL 2272. We know our product is a safer product because of that. And I think you see the e-bike manufacturers, you certainly saw other manufacturers that are looking for that test standard. They're looking for that certification so they can build that consumer confidence in their product.
Right.
I think that's important.
And that consumer confidence is ultimately about peace of mind, right? So you bring in a product to your home, you use it every single day. It should fade into the background. It's not something that you should be thinking about, and that's really where the manufacturer and the product developers come into play, right? And I think Dr. Steele mentioned that the risk shouldn't ultimately trump the enormous potential of lithium batteries that we have. Like, it's enabled us to stay connected, work remotely, so many different things, right? We have little under 3 minutes left. I'd love for you two of you to kind of close it out with a few closing thoughts and cause for hope in terms of what you see in the marketplace, as well as how you see the business community reacting to this going forward.
Yeah, I can start.
Go ahead.
So what I'll say is, for this audience, for this community of innovators and product developers and manufacturers, I think what's important is knowing that we have this series of experts who are ready to assist you in making sure that products that are introduced to the market are introduced the right way. So Sean, speaking from the fire service, you've got tons of stories, tons of statistics that really kind of drive the why this needs to be approached in this way. We don't want people to die. We don't want people to get injured. And as standards developers, we want to ensure that there's something in place to ultimately kind of oversee the process of innovation. What we hear is that standards stifle innovation, which I totally disagree with. And what I like to tell people is that standards really provide that risk mitigation. Where there isn't a standard, for example, in the case of the hoverboard, when that product was introduced to the market, there was no standard. But when we see that as product innovators and developers, it's important to note that we can develop a new standard. And I will say, for UL Standards and Engagement right now, we have over, I think Dr. Steele gave the number, 1,800 standards and documents within our portfolio. We've got a lot of different standards that are not just focused on the battery or the battery chemistry, but are focused on the consumer products that utilize those batteries, but also other products that may interact with those products and ultimately, make that chain reaction even more catastrophic and severe. So there's an opportunity for even the folks that are in this room to support standards development by participating on technical committees, not necessarily saying that you have to quit your day job, but you can participate in our process and be aware of how standards are truly impacting safety. And all of that information is available. What I would say is, just to kind of close things out here, is that standards are not designed to be used in a vacuum. They're also not designed to be created in a vacuum. So we want diverse perspectives, diverse voices to help us ensure that these documents are truly driving safety because they have the right technical inputs.
Absolutely.
So the fire service, I'll say from an IFF perspective, we are not against technology. We're not against innovation. At the end of the day, we realize there are a lot of really smart people working on these technologies or these products. But when all else fails, I should say, when that product fails, we own it. We have to respond. We're responsible for responding and mitigating and bringing that incident to a successful conclusion. We see 3,000 to 3,500 people a year die in house fires. Our responsibility is to try to reduce that number. So that's why we're interested in making sure that the standards are advanced, that they're covering the new technologies as they come to the market, and that we make it a safer environment for all, for the resident and for our responding members.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Denice. Thank you for lending your expertise today so we can learn how to sort of move forward, going, I think, keeping in innovation in mind, but safety as well, kind of the center of that discussion, right? Our panelists will stick around once we conclude if you'd like to connect and ask some questions. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you.